and spinning is having a little tough time. Oh, we're recording. Okay, good. So our Torah portion for today, for today's study, according to the calendar, looking forward to Shabbat, we have two Torah portions that are scheduled to be read. I wrote a little bit about this in the Torah Sparks. The two Torah portions are Chukat and Balak. So Chukat begins on page 880. And then, and that goes on till 893. And then Balak begins on 894, and it goes through till 909. Okay, so we have a nice chunk of text here. Each of these Torah readings have some very juicy pieces to it, and I already mentioned in the Torah Sparks that we're doubling up this Torah reading, which doesn't always happen. I was looking in the calendar. The last time this happened was 2009, but before that, it happened like 3 or 4 times every 3 years. So it happened in 2006, and it happened in 2003, and I think it happened in 1999. So there's all kinds of like weirdo things that happen in terms of adjusting the calendar when it's necessary. But the point of doubling it up is to catch up with the land of Israel, so that we all end up reading the beginning of Devarim right before Tisha B'Av. So this coming week will be the date of the 17th of Tammuz, which is the beginning of the 3 weeks of a mourning with regard to the destruction of the temple that culminates on Tisha B'Av. And we read the Torah reading of Devarim, the first reading of the book of Deuteronomy. It's called Shabbat Chazon, and that's the vision from the Haftorah that precedes the terrible date of Tisha B'Av. So in order to catch up, to make sure that we actually get there, we're doubling up Chukat and Balak. Then we have Pinchas, and then we double up Matot and Maseh, which is a very usual doubling up. This one is less usual. Okay, anyway, so there's a lot of stuff happening in both of these Torah readings, as I say. Does anybody have a particular piece that they want to look at? Going once, going twice. Yes, Lynn.
I just have a question, which I don't know. Who is Balaam? I mean, he's not of the Israelites. They talk about the people that came out of Egypt, yet he is talking about the same God, right? My God, our God.
Yes, for sure. So if you turn to if you look on page 894, where Balak begins, Balak is actually the secondary character, and Bilam is the main character of this story. But Balak, his name gets mentioned first in the text, so his name gets to be the name for the Torah portion. So, okay, you asked the question. How about you start us off? Start us off at the top, please, of 894.
Okay, Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Moab was alarmed because that people was so numerous. Moab dreaded the Israelites, and Moab said to the elders of Midian, "Now this horde will lick clean all that is about us, as an ox licks up the grass of the field." Balak, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor, in Pethor, which is by the Euphrates, in the land of his kinfolk, to invite him, saying, "There is a people that came out of Egypt. It hides the earth from view, and it is settled next to me. Come then, put a curse upon this people for me, since they are too numerous for me. Perhaps I can thus defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed indeed, and he whom you curse is cursed." Oh, he's frozen? He's frozen again.
Yeah, I think he got it. He'll be back.
Did it freeze and send him?
The rabbi froze, yeah.
Yeah, did it freeze and send him home?
Hi, Rabbi.
I again, I conked out again, right when you started reading. So how far did you get?
I got to the verse, the end of the paragraph, verse 22, verse 6, chapter 22, verse 6, the last.
Okay, great. So that's enough reading. Thank you. That was a great reading. I really enjoyed it. Okay, so and again, I'm getting stuck here with this whole business. Okay. So this introduces us to Bilam. Balak is the king of Moab, and Moab is a people and a region that is on the, if we can imagine the map of Israel, if you have an Eitz Chaim, it's in the back of the book. If otherwise, we have the Mediterranean is all the way on the west. Then you have the land of Israel that hugs the coast of the Mediterranean. And then you have the Jordan on the east, right? So the Israel that we're familiar with is between those two landmarks, the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. On the other side of the Jordan River, keeping on going east, that's where Moab is. So the Israelites have now made their trek. This is happening in the 40th year of their wandering. They left Egypt 40 years ago. They wandered eastward from Egypt to the land of Israel. Then they had to take 38 and a half years of extra wandering and going here and going there and killing time until they finally went, instead of going straight from Egypt straight into the land of Israel, they took a big roundabout route and they went like this, right? So they went all the way around them, the bottom, the Negev, the south of Israel, and instead of entering from the west into the east, they went a big circle, and now they're all the way on the east, on the other side of the land of Israel, and they're about to cross the Jordan to come into the land of Israel, and they're in the vicinity, the territory of Moab, and Balak is the king, and he's very upset. So he's very afraid of them, and his fear turns into kind of a racist hatred, and uses all this animal imagery about how these beasts are going to come like locusts and so on and so forth, right? That's in verse 4. So what is he going to do? So he decides that the way that he's going to combat them is not by military engagement, but he's going to call in a magician. He's going to call in a prophet, and that's Bilam. So Bilam is introduced to us in verse 5. And what information do we have from that from that verse? And of course, you need a little bit of notes, of explication. We find out, where is Bilam located?
Really far away.
So look at the note for verse 5, where it says Petor, right? He sent agents to Bilam ben Beor, Bilam the son of Beor, to Petor. Okay, so can you read that? Identified.
The note, I don't have the notes. I'm in the JPS.
Oh, okay. So I'll read the note. Petor, identified with Pitru on the Sajur River, a tributary of the Euphrates, some 12 miles, 20 kilometers south of Carchemish. It is at least a 20-day journey from Petor to Moab, a distance of about 400 miles. Okay, because the text records 4 such journeys, the traveling would have taken about 3 months. So that's a really crucial piece of practical detail for us to take in as really showing how much effort is being put into recruiting this man. Right? This man is not a local guy. This man is world famous, at least region famous. He's famous in that part of the world as being a go-to guy, right? And he, that's the whole point. You are such a celebrity prophet, and you have such a reputation for being powerfully connected to whatever divine forces we want to call them, right? Everybody calls God by whatever name they want. That reputation precedes him, and therefore Balak, in total desperation, says, I got to get that guy. I got to get that guy who's so far away to come here and help me out. So that's who Bilam is. So in terms of your question, yes, Bilam has a reputation of having divine connections, right? He's a VIP in the divine world. Now, different people in those times thought of the divine in different ways. And they, worshipped idols or other kinds of names of God that they gave. But what the Torah is now saying is, actually, Bilam, as we'll see, in the rest of the story, he has this connection to the real God. He really does have a connection with God.
He's not part of the Israelites, so I'm confused as to how that came about. I guess they don't explain that.
So that's a crucial point to notice. And he's not the first non-Israelite who has had a genuine connection with God. The Torah doesn't claim that other people in the world can't have a connection to God. On the contrary, that was God's original plan. God's original plan is that everybody should have a connection to God and serve God in their particular neighborhood. What happens is that God keeps on getting disappointed and sees the whole world turning away to evil and to idolatry, the whole way that the Bible presents itself. And finally, God chooses one people to focus on. But even that people, as they wander through history, they keep on encountering other people who have figured out that there's God. Abraham has a famous meeting with Melchizedek. Melchizedek is a priest to God, the same God. So even though he doesn't come up with an Israelite religion, but he's worshiping the same God, because after all, there is only one God. In other stories, we have the king of Egypt actually talking to God, and God appears to the king, and the king of Egypt says to God, "You're a righteous God. Why are you bothering me? I didn't do anything wrong." So there is, here and there in the Torah, an acknowledgement anybody can have a connection with God. That's the whole point. The reason that Abraham is going to be a blessing to the world is because Abraham hopefully will actually have an influence on other people to come close to God. So the Torah doesn't bat an eye here about acknowledging that there can be somebody else, not Israelite, who has a connection with God. We think sometimes that we have the exclusive property rights on God, and we also think that if the Torah ever tells us that somebody gets close to God, oh, they must have converted. Not necessarily so. We sometimes have used that concept in our midrashim, in our interpretations, because that's the only way we could conceive of somebody in the world that we understood, that we experienced. When people were clobbering us over the head, it was very hard for us to imagine that there might be a non-Jew who's close to God. So throughout Jewish history, when there's a lot of oppression, we start thinking about it as us and them. Only we know God, and everybody else is lost completely. But that's not the biblical view, and that's not the biblical view of what the potential is. So another good example is Yitro. So Yitro is a priest in Midian, but on the other hand, he comes to visit his son-in-law, and he's so happy that God took the Israelites out of Egypt, and he's amazed by all the miracles that God did. So you have midrashim that say, and that means, of course, he must have converted. And there's no indication anywhere in the Torah or in history that Yitro or his followers converted. They were always friends of the Jewish people, but they always had their own ideas. In modern times, the Druze are a possible example of that. The Druze are not Muslim. They have their own kind of secret religion, but apparently it's a monotheistic religion, and they feel, totally, capable of being part of Israeli society and supporting Israel. from within their own religious tenets. So that question, like you're saying, is important for us to be clear about it. The Torah has no problem with the God of the universe actually being accepted by other people in the universe. The problem with Bilam is that he wants to use his power for the wrong ends. He wants to make money off it. Well, guess what? There are rabbis that want to do that too. So that's not that's not a proof of anything about him. It just means that he was a failed human being, and of course caused a lot of trouble. But also, the story is that the curses that he is hired to utter get turned around, and they become blessings.
I find this really interesting, the whole time frame here. When you think about how far, so here, Balak, he sees what he's claiming is an imminent threat because there's from this numerous people, and so in the face of this imminent threat, he is sending people from the court to travel, a round trip of 40 days to take care of the problem. And of course, we haven't gotten there yet, but then Bilam says no, and then it has to do it again. So, this is going to end up taking, 80 to 100 days here, for what is, if this is really an imminent threat, so I think for me, that's interesting in terms of the whole time thing, but also that when nothing happens, I mean, as he tries to get Bilam to come and it's taking so long, and in fact, the threat doesn't actually materialize.
That's what you think. That's your problem. You're this liberal pinky.
I guess that's what I am.
You're just not seeing the how the Israelites are destroying civilization while they sit there sipping their tea. Right. You're right. I mean, it's perfectly. It's very important to see what that's the base, the factual basis to really help us even more appreciate how this kind of like curdled hatred makes people look at reality in a very particular interpretation, and you can't show them the facts. Like you can't say, look, they're not doing anything, are they? No, you can't tell me they're planning. That's what every conspiracy theory is all about. Conspiracy theories are that you can't dismiss them. You can't prove they can't be proved wrong. Right? There's a word for that. But anything that you show just ends up reinforcing how nefarious and how tricky and how dangerous these people really are. Now, of course, Israel will end up having military campaigns when as they try to get through and cross the Jordan River, because that's that's the nature of some of these other peoples that don't want to let them through. At the end of Chukat, right before Balak, there is a military campaign. So it's not like we're completely quiescent and not doing anything. From Balak's perspective, the last few lines of the previous Torah reading make him, very legitimately afraid. Look at 892. So in JPS, this is chapter 21 of Numbers, starting. Let's start from 31.
Yeah. 27, 31. So Israel occupied the land of the Amorites. Then Moses sent to spy out Yazer, and they captured its dependencies and dispossessed the Amorites who were there.
Okay, so they marched on. Again, 1 second, just the background is that they want to make peace with the Amorites, and the Amorites don't want to. So they end up having to fight them, and they're victorious. Go ahead.
They marched on and went up the road to Bashan, and King Og of Bashan with all his people came out to Edrei to engage them in battle. But the Lord said to Moses, do not fear him, for I give him and all his people and his land into your hand. You shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt in Heshbon. They defeated him and his sons and all his people until no remnant was left of him, and then they took possession of his country. The Israelites then marched on and encamped in the steppes of Moab across the Jordan from Jericho.
Right. So that's the setup that we have now. Yeah, there are some military campaigns that Israel has successfully fought. So it's not like they're just completely innocuous. The presentation in the Torah is that they're constantly suing for peace, and they're being refused. So that the wars that they are encountering here are not the necessary wars that the Torah has no problem with. Once you get into the land of Canaan, once you get over the land of the river and get into the land of Canaan, you will have to fight the local inhabitants to capture the land. But here, again and again and again, the Israelites are saying, just give us free passage. We'll pay you even for the food and the water. Just let us go through. This is not where we want to be. We want to be on the other side of the river. And they don't believe them. Yeah, Lynn, you wanted to say something.
The part right before where we read, so the thing that the bards recite.
Yeah.
I just reread it and now I'm more confused. That's pro-Israelite, right? That's saying all of their campaigns and all of their fights that they've won or is it the other way around? Because my thought originally before I reread it was that not only are the Israelites having, conquering these peoples in their journey, there are poets talking about it. So it's like huge permeation through the cultures, to the surrounding lands. Not that I'm on Balak's side at all, but he's not in a vacuum is all I'm trying to say.
I agree. That's what I'm trying to point out for sure. So if you look, and this is one of two poetic sections or song sections that are in the previous Torah reading in Chukat. So why don't we start from start from 21.
Okay, I'm on Israel now sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, saying, let me pass through your country. We will not turn off into fields or vineyards, and we will not drink water from wells. We will follow the king's highway until we have crossed your territory.
Okay, so that's the point where they say, we mean you no harm whatsoever. We're just going to stay. We're not going to trample your fields. We're not going to cause a lot of damage. We're just going to go on the road. Just let us go through. What happens?
But Sihon would not let Israel pass through his territory. Sihon gathered all his people and went out against Israel in the wilderness. He came to Yahaz and engaged Israel in battle. But Israel put them to the sword and took possession of their land, from the Arnon to the Jabbok, as far as Az of the Ammonites, for Az marked the boundary of the Ammonites. Israel took all those towns, and Israel settled in all the towns of the Amorites in Heshbon and all its dependencies. Now Heshbon was the city of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had fought against a former king of Moab and taken all his land from him as far as the Arnon. Therefore the bards would recite, come to Heshbon, firmly built and well-founded in Sihon's city. For the fire went forth from Heshbon, flame from Sihon's city, consuming Ar of Moab, the lords of Bamoth by the Arnon. Woe to you, O Moab, you are undone. O people of Chemosh, his sons are rendered fugitive and his daughters captive by an Amorite king, Sihon. Yet we have cast them down utterly, Heshbon along with Dibon. We have wrought desolation at Nopah, which is hard by Medeba. So Israel occupied the land of the Amorites. Then Moses sent to spy out Yazer.
Right. Yeah. That's the part that we were reading. So I was trying to, just select that part. But now we get, as you say, we have the context even more. So what happens is that Israel is a reluctant conqueror. the Torah, tries to say that we keep on suing for, as I say, suing for peace, or just saying, just let us go through. This is not the only place that this happens. And then we have this conquest. And once the conquest happens, there's no turning back, right? So this is, to the victor go the spoils. And then we get a little background about who this king is, Sichon. And what do we find out about Sichon when we read verse 26?
That Sichon had previously conquered Moab.
Right. So there's this back and forth in this region where Sichon, who is the king who's now defeated by Israel, he's engaged in plenty of battles also, and he's actually been victorious in his own campaigns to conquer things. So that's the other part that we're beginning to learn in a kind of a biblical way, that this is a region of struggle and conflict, and people are trying to see if they can get a little extra territory. The Israelites stop at the border, right? Where was that? At Ammon, at the border of Ammon. That's in verse 24. But we have other reports about that all of these nations are fighting with each other, and depending on who has the upper hand, they take over certain parts of the territory. So when Israel actually conquers something, it shouldn't be that unusual. Everybody's conquering things, and everybody's losing battles back and forth and around in circles. So that's the context for the song also. It's hard to see where that song actually comes from. Are these bards Israelite bards, or are they Sichon's bards? Are they singing about a victory of Sichon, or are they singing about the victory of Israel against Sichon? I think that the simplest reading is that this is actually an old song. It's a military victory song that is part of the Amorite victory celebrations against Moab when they conquered Moab, and yet it's recorded in in this song, right, where it says, which is what, 28, right? For fire went forth from Heshbon, flame from Sichon city, consuming Ar of Moab. So that seems to me to be about Sichon conquering Moab and celebrating how terrific, Sichon is. The kind of standard victory celebration songs that we have heard about all over the place when you have emperors and kings and generals and stuff. So in that way, how do we read that text? What's that text doing in the Torah if it's actually just this victory song of Sichon?
Well, it magnifies the victory that now Sichon and the city have been conquered, because he is lauded as such a conqueror himself.
Right. So the conqueror of a conqueror must be really something, right? So from Israel's perspective, this is an aggrandizement. This is putting us on a big strong pedestal. There's a little bit of a polemic here, like, oh, you guys think you're such hot stuff, and you've been singing about how terrific you are, and now look who came in and knocked you off your pedestal. So the pride that Israel has, and the anti-Chemosh polemic here. Chemosh is the god of the Amorites, right? So, right, Avadata am Chemosh. Oh, that's the Moabites. I'm sorry. You are undone, O people of Chemosh. So that God is no good. Well, guess what? Now your God is no good. Our God is the victor. So on the one hand, that makes us feel good. And maybe that also, as you were saying before, without defending Balak, it actually sort of rebounds into an unpleasant feeling that, Balak really doesn't feel secure now that Israel is so victorious and so mighty. To a certain extent, I would say that that's, on the one hand, run of the mill, right? You start putting out propaganda that's anti your enemy, and you say all kinds of terrible things about them. But this seems to be a very unique kind of reaction that Balak has. And then the question is, why, if this is a bloody time and it's a bloody area of the world, as actually at that time every part of the world was bloody, then what's the unique chilling factor that is bothering Balak anymore? He wouldn't necessarily feel this way about Sichon. He wouldn't feel this way if somebody else was coming to attack him. So he'd get his troops together and go get him, or he would sue for peace, or he would, make a treaty or something. Yeah, David.
Is it so then that the defeated Moab is now looking to pick a fight with the Israelites? They don't have autonomy anymore.
Right. So what exactly is the question? What exactly is the situation with Moab now? Has Moab been completely subjugated by Sichon, and now Sichon has been defeated by Israel? So now Moab is worried that they're going to just become a vassal state of Israel. Is that the idea? Or is this now, are they taking advantage of the fact that there's some kind of chaos going on, and this gives them a shot at reestablishing themselves? They have a king, right? Balak is their king. So, and you have all kinds of midrashim about actually how he took, power and so on, taking seriously this unsettled situation. But and we're going to get to in a second another factor. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell what's going on. What's exactly, what are the machinations of Balak's thinking completely? We do have the interest of the Torah is in presenting Balak as seeking a very unique way to fight the Israelites, right? And a very strange way, which is he's going to fight Israel with divine curses. So to me, that's part of what's going on here. Right, the resentment and the fear that Balak is experiencing is put in the context of the Torah into why specifically Israel, because Israel really is seen as being different. If it was Moab, if it was some Midian, who's mentioned here also, they have an alliance with Midian. If it was some other local people, if it was the Amorites, then everything would just be run of the mill. It would be all about whose swords are more numerous and whose warriors are mightier and so on. There's this chilling sense that somehow there's this weird God force that is coming across the landscape. And the only way to fight that, as we've seen, the swords are not working. The only way to fight that is to get another divine power to overpower the force that is on the side of the Israelites. So it's a kind of a corrupted view of what the Torah is actually presenting to us, which is God is actually leading the Jewish people forward. But now, in this kind of like dim awareness that that's the case, Balak is not therefore saying, oh, okay, so wow, this is pretty special. The Israelite people have this really amazing religious quality to them. Instead, it becomes creepy and scary and disgusting, right? So that's where Balak needs to find a different way to fight this magical, demonic, divine group of people. And that's what makes them not human. right? That's where he uses that imagery in verse 4, right? Right, where it says, now this horde will lick clean all that is about us as as an ox licks up the grass of the field. It's very reminiscent also of Pharaoh's dehumanizing of the Israelites when he makes them into slaves. So there's this uncanny feeling. There's something strange about those Israelites. The quality that sets them apart from all the other marauding tribes that are around. Moses is just not another successful military chieftain, and therefore he goes out of his way, literally, right, to find some man of God someplace who can stand up against Moses. Yeah, that's the story. That's what's going on here. At least that's the way some of these pieces fall together for me. I mentioned Midian. Does that make any associations happen for everybody?
Jethro.
Yeah. So if we see this, he's disgusted. Moab is disgusted. That's verse 3. Very afraid, very disgusted. And then verse 4 is a communication. We get a leaked email between Moab and Midian and the elders of Midian saying, we got to do something about this. These strangers that are coming through, etc., that I was discussing before, but it's a communication to Midian, right? And then look at verse 7. Lynn, it's back to you. 22.
The elders, sorry?
Yeah, 22:7.
The elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, versed in divination, set out. They came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. He said to them, spend the night here, and I shall reply to you as the Lord may instruct me. So the Moabite dignitaries stayed with Balaam.
Okay, so the delegation that comes to Balaam is introduced to us as a composite, right? The delegation is both Moabite magicians or representatives with magical accoutrements, and also Midianite elders that are part of it. Later on, it then says this is a Moabite delegation, which it is, because it's all coming, after all, from Balak. But there's Midianite cooperation and participation. And that brings us to the question of what's going on with Midian and what about Yitro? Yitro is a Midianite priest, as I mentioned before, and he's Moses' father-in-law, and he's a great friend of the Israelite people. So what do we make of the fact that here we have Midian actively in alliance with people who are going to try to curse out and defeat Israel?
Well, that was a long time ago. I mean, the
How long?
Israelites, well, the Israelites have been wandering now for 38 and a half years, right? And, Jethro was not such a young guy when he came, and joined Moses for a bit and helped him out to, give him advice and what have you. So it could very well be, that Jethro has died. And that's also reminiscent of what happened in Egypt, where what had been a close relationship is no longer remembered.
Right, the new Pharaoh arises and doesn't know anything about Joseph. Right, so is there a new Midian that has a new generation of Midianites? Very good. That doesn't have that Yitro heritage. That doesn't recall anymore Yitro's close ties with Moses. We should know that historically speaking, I think I said it very briefly, Yitro's descendants and followers continue as an identifiable group. And they live side by side with the Israelites for generations. So later on, when Saul has to fight against the Amalek nation, he sends out a messenger and he tells the Canaanites, who are the Yitro descendants, get out of the way because I'm going to come right through, and you guys are too close to where the battlefield is going to be, and you may get hurt. So there's this opposite communication over there. So there is an ongoing remembrance of Yitro's connection with, with the Jewish people. If I'm not mistaken, Yitro is the prophet of the Druze. So the heritage is not completely forgotten, but always the question is by whom. And Midian here is definitely under a leadership that is totally willing to destroy Israel. Going backwards, maybe Yitro was exceptional even in his own time. Maybe Yitro was that, that minority voice that refused to go along with the general attitude that Midian may have had for strangers or for Hebrews or for something like that. So remember, his daughters don't extend much of a welcome to the guy that saves their life until he insists that they do that. So it gives us another tantalizing, question about how people navigate in societies that may have an overwhelming approach to other people that's not hospitable, but they may feel that it's wrong. How much do you go out on a limb? How much do you stand up for what you believe? And how much do you want to take a stance in the opposite way? Bilam, we have only a couple of minutes left. Bilam is this very fascinating figure because he's got supposedly a real good connection with God, and yet he betrays that connection, and then God doesn't let him get away with it, right? And we have a situation of a person who could have stood up to Balak, and Balak doesn't have any control over him. Like it says, he's miles and miles, hundreds of miles away. He could simply say, well, I'm very busy, or I'm so Zoom fatigued, I just can't do it. But he picks up the opportunity. So when do we pick up opportunities to do good? That's the opposite side of this. Just to go through one last moment, because we have a half a moment. Let's look at chapter 25, and let's look at verse 6, toward the end of Balak, the last few verses.
Just then, one of the Israelites came and brought a Midianite woman over to his companions in the sight of Moses and of the whole Israelite community, who were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw this, he left the assembly, and taking a spear in his hand, he followed the Israelite into the chamber and stabbed both of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly. Then the plague against the Israelites was checked. Those who died of the plague numbered 24,000. Okay,
so the plague comes because of this mass betrayal of God by the Israelite people. Then they have this running after idolatry, and here we have the Midianite presence mentioned again, right? We have these two very important, very public figures, and one of them is an Ish Yisrael, a member of the people of Israel, and the other one is a Midianite woman, and they go and engage in improper practices at the tent of meeting, and this outrages Pinchas, which of course gets us to next week's Torah reading. Somebody who stands up in the middle of a mass movement to go the opposite way. So that's one of the motifs that are in here as well. Who stands up for good? Who stands up for evil? And at what cost? All right. Thank you to everybody. Thanks for putting up with the glitches. And
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you.
good night.